All right, Neil, what should I consider when choosing a new bike? People type this into Google a lot.
They do?
They do, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so I wanted you to explain it.
Mate, it's got to be the colour.
Yeah.
It's got to be the colour.
Yeah.
Colour's number one.
It's got to look fast.
It's got to look fast. It's got to have deep section tubes and deep dish wheels and stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's about it, really.
Yeah,
There's nothing
okay.
else to say.
Well, video done.
Yep,
there you go.
done. See you guys. No, look. There's a couple of things that you need to consider. The biggest one I would call the biggest sort of overarching thing to look at is that your bike's got to be fit for purpose. Now, I think we spoke about this in a previous video, but we'll go over it a little bit more detail today. Fit for purpose means that you got to look at what you're doing with it, bro. If you're doing fast bunch rides 2 times a week, you might do the odd criterium race, a little bit of road racing. If you're sort of at that level and you're wanting ultimate performance, you can start thinking about aero bikes and bikes that are pretty light and pretty stiff as one of your main criteria. If you're bumming around during the week with your mates and your average speeds are 28 kilometers an hour and you don't race and that sort of stuff, there's a lot less impetus to move towards a race bike. You know, you might want to start to consider a more comfortable cruisy bike with a bigger tyre, with softer pressures, something with a little bit less stiff bottom bracket. The beautiful BMC.
Road machine.
The road machine.
Endurance bike.
Endurance bike, exactly right. So it's got to be fit for purpose. Now, diving into this a little bit more detail. The geometry, which is, my bread and butter. Let's talk about the geometry. This is a little bit more specific. So there's 6 or 7 things you've got to consider. The first 2 are the obvious ones that everyone thinks about, the reach and the stack. Now, the reach and the stack refer to the length of the bike and the height of the bike in the front end. So you can think of these as like X and Y coordinates, which spatially locate the center of the head tube relative to the center of the bottom bracket. This might sound technical, but these are just measures of how long the bike is and how tall it is. You will want to be looking at the geometry of your current frame when you're upgrading. Get those numbers, get the reach and the stack, and then have a look at the componentry that you're using on your bike. And we're assuming that you're nice and comfortable on your bike at the moment and you just want to replicate the same sort of position but with some better geometry for your new bike. So you want to look at the componentry that you're using. So let's say you've got a bike with a 385mm reach but you're using a 70mm stem. Your next bike you're going to want to try and use a longer stem so the steering is a bit more stable so you don't have such a short stem on it. So you might consider a frame with a shorter reach so that you can lengthen the stem. So if you can shorten the reach on that frame by 10mm, your next bike can have an 80mm stem, which is going to improve the handling. That's a clean-cut example there. Similar thing with the stack. If you've got a 30 or 40mm spacer stack under your stem on your current bike,
don't get me started on chimneys.
A proper chimney. If you've got an absolute stack there, one of the things that this does that's negative with a big spacer stack is it increases the steerer tube torque. So that's a carbon fibre tube, that fork and that steerer tube. And as you input steering motions into it, steering moments, there's a certain amount of twist along that carbon fibre pole, that tube. The longer the tube is, the more it's going to twist. The shorter it is, the less it's going to twist. So if you can delete some of that spacer stack, it's going to basically steer better. It's going to steer in a more direct, controlled fashion. You're going to appreciate the handling of the bike a lot more. So if you've got a 30 or 40mm spacer stack because your neck's not that flexible, you've got long legs or whatever it is, you might want to consider a bike with a taller stack next time, 20, 30mm taller, so that you don't have to use as much of a spacer stack. This is the number one thing that I see that people get wrong, is that they buy a bike with too aggressive geometry. We end up having to run a 40mm spacer stack and we're looking at it going, oh geez, it's still 10mm lower than it really should be. It's a very easy mistake to make in the rush of buying your fancy new bike. Just make sure it's not too aggressive. Yeah. So the reach and the stack are the 2 big ones. A couple of other ones which you need to think about. The third big one is the seat tube angle. The seat tube angle of the bike refers to the layback of the seat post, or how much it's laid back relative to a vertical post. So most bikes are sort of between 73 and 75 degrees. If you have a look, for example, at a Cervelo bike, most of them have got 73-degree seat angles, which are fairly laid back. And then if you look at something like a Tarmac, it's got a much steeper seat tube angle. So what this does is your saddle is clamped up here, you've got the seat tube poking up here. As you move the seat forward and back, if you've got a particularly slack seat tube angle and you need your seat a long way forward, you can actually run out of adjustment in the saddle travel, so you actually can't get enough seat set forward. And similarly, if you need your seat a long way back on the rails and your seat tube angle is too steep, you can't move it far enough back. So you need to consider the seat tube angle of your old frame and look at where the saddle is clamped. If it's clamped for example, it's slammed all the way forward, you're going to want to look for a bike with a steeper seat tube angle to enable the clamping point on the seat to A, achieve your correct seat setback, and B, not run out of range in doing so, right? So you can fiddle with this a little bit with a zero offset seat post. If you need to get more seat set forward, a zero offset post will help, but look at the seat tube angle and make sure it's not too steep or too slack. Just have a look at some bike geometry charts and kind of nut all this out, because this has been a problem repeatedly for me over the years, particularly with one particular brand which we've mentioned earlier, which is Cervelo.
Okay.
The S5s, for example, mate, they've got, and I don't mean to pick on these guys, but it's a great example.
Do it.
Great, just go nuts.
Yeah.
The S5, for example, has a cradle where the saddle sits, which is huge. It's like 50 or 60 millimeters long, the bottom of the cradle that the seat rail sits in. It's hugely long. So if you've got a saddle with a 75 millimeter rail, which is really common, you can move the seat forward and backwards 10 millimeters, 15 millimeters, almost nothing, right? You've got barely any travel. In addition, they've all got 73-degree seat angles. So if you've got a particular need to have your saddle a long way forward for whatever reason, you often can't get it far enough forward with a Cervelo, even with their top-end flagship race bike, the S5, right? So, that's a great example of a poor engineering design for the clamp combined with a slack seat angle, just meaning you can't often get the seat far enough forward. So I've had 100 clients in the last 10 years that I can, maybe even more, where they've asked me, hey, can I get a Cervelo 54 centimeter S5? And I've looked at the geometry for them and gone, no, we can't get your seat far enough forward. You've got to look at something else. So, I don't mean to pick on them, but there's a few quirks out there in the bike world with steep and slack seat tube angles that you need to be aware of when you're looking at your next bike.
Okay.
And mixed into that is the seat layback. So if you can go with a zero offset or a layback post to try and move the seat further forward or back, but make sure that you're going to be able to move your seat to the right position, people, before you buy the next bike. And then the last stuff is the component choice. So you'll be wanting to talk to the bike shop or speccing this when you're ordering the bike, the crank length you want, the bar width that you want, and the stem length. Those are the three big components that you need to get right. And you can do a little bit of calculation. Your next bike's going to have a shorter reach and a longer stem, so you can get the stem length correct by referencing off the reach of the frame and the length of the stem compared to your old bike. The width of the bar, personal preference there. You should, hopefully before you buy a new bike, you'll know what sort of bar width that you want. And then the crank length. We talk about this extensively in the context of shorter cranks, but make sure you can spec the bike with the cranks that you want. So those are the big three components, and then the big four geometry things that you need to look for in your next bike.
Are there any tools people can use? So I'm thinking of like Geometry Geeks.
Yeah.
I really have enjoyed using that in the past, because you can figure out where your previous bike was wrong, and then compare it to other bikes and find out, by the millimetre, where the next bike could potentially sit.
Yes, I wish I owned shares in Geometry Geeks, because I have a perpetual tab open in my browser when I'm at work with Geometry Geeks.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah. We use it all the time for quick, easy comparisons when people are talking to us at the end of the fit session about their next frame, like what should they order, and we always use it. Sometimes with older bikes, you've got to double check the numbers are correct. But for something run-of-the-mill modern bike, the numbers are pretty much always correct on there. I've cross-checked them a few times against the manufacturer's websites. But Geometry Geeks is great, because you can look at your next bike and go, it's 6 millimeters shorter and it's 15 millimeters taller, and that's going to enable me to use this and that component. It's a great tool. Yeah. Really highly recommend it.
Does it narrow in on that Cervelo example that you referenced before, though?
No.
Okay,
so there's a couple of quirks. I mean, you can see when you look at the charts, you see that the seat tube angle is fairly slack at 73 degrees. But those quirks are something that you might want to ask a previous Cervelo owner about, for example. Yeah, and then there's a couple of other bikes where you need to be very careful of that as well. But I single the Cervelo out because it is probably the most common example of something that could be a big problem for seat layback, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing, Neill. Well, if somebody's like wanting more details now on, choosing the right bike and working out their reach and working out, their position. You put something together called Bike Fit Fundamentals.
We have, mate. This is a good first start to actually fit yourself properly to your bike before you actually go and buy a new frame. So if you base your recommendations on your thought process on your next frame off spurious positioning, you know, your seat's too high, your reach is too long. If you do that, the next frame's going to be wrong. Yeah, so you should definitely make sure your position is really good before you look at the next frame. Otherwise, all of this that we spoke about is going to be useless information. You must be starting from a really good position. And Bike Fit Fundamentals, our 7-part program that we put together in the last couple of years, a great way to do it yourself if you don't want to go and see a professional bike fit.
Cool. Links below.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Go for it, guys.